Hi there, my name's Vince, I'm a composer, and in this video I'll be sharing some footage of me messing around, making some music from scratch, and I'm specifically showcasing some techniques and tools to enter MIDI information in a way that is perhaps a little less traditional. Techniques that go beyond just playing in notes on the keyboard or using a fader, sequencers, arpeggiators, probability, even using my voice to program MIDI, some slightly more outlandish and unusual tools as well. So my concept is to create a kind of wall of notes with sort of intricate patterns and things going on that I can use as a sort of texture or a backdrop in a way that would be within the limitations of what I would consider sort of media composing. So trying to create a piece of music that I could imagine being used in a video game or a film or something. But this kind of background texture might be a good fit for sort of more experimental or granular approaches to MIDI sequencing. The specific tool I have in mind is something called reMIDI. I find the concept of the plugin is incredibly simple and intuitive. Basically, it kind of acts a bit like a sampler or like an MPC or like Logic sampler, except for MIDI. It comes with a bunch of factory sounds, which are just MIDI files. So if I just zoom in a bit, these are the notes I'm playing. And it's looping around that. And then when I hit another key, it's just triggering segments of this MIDI file that I've loaded in. So you can kind of chop around and create new patterns out of that pre-existing MIDI material. And it's quite easy to input your own MIDI into this plugin. Okay, so now I'm just going to work on this. Just adjust anything that I don't want. That feels a little uneven. I don't mind hard quantizing everything for now because I think I want to create something that holds together rhythmically, and if the timing's a little bit off, it's going to diminish the impact, so I want everything to be really tight. So what I'm going to do is select the size of the slice that I want, the size of the phrase, so I'm going to make that, I think, 1 bar. Then I just right-click and slice to pads. Just going to mash some keys and see what happens. So obviously the higher up I play on my keyboard, the more I start to access these higher phrases. I think I want it all to be double speed and see how that sounds. There's a speed button up here. And if you like a section, you can just hold it down and get a loop. I think my instinct just for kind of throwing something together quite quickly is just to establish an interesting soundscapey pad that's a bit more sustained, and then introduce this as like a layer to that, and then maybe combine that with some more traditional orchestral colors, and then maybe have something like a solo cello over the top. I think that would be cool. One way that I could go is to use a similar or the same source sound to create this pad. One technique which I quite like that is again a slightly outside of the box way of creating sounds is to use the arpeggiator, and then after the chain I'm going to use scripter for this. It's called probability gate. And that just sets a probability for whether or not the note is going to play. Then essentially I get a kind of random note generator. So I can just hold down a chord. Okay, maybe this could work. Having super slow rate, and then if I add a bit of probability to that, then it'll just add a bit more variation to the pattern. And put this on random. So I'm just playing little chords, and because I've got the ARP latch mode on, I'm just playing with the pitch bend a little bit. And so in this kind of situation, I've got control over the process, but kind of limited control. And I'm sort of playing with what I'm given as well. So this is the data, the real data, if you like, as opposed to the keys that I was pressing, which were obviously a lot more simple. I quite like pushing the extremes of that detuning. What I'm keen to do now is program some light cinematic percussion. By the way, Reason now runs as a plugin. Reason was my first DAW, absolutely love it. And you can now run the entire thing from inside Logic, which is cool. But anyhow, so this object synth is a really cool instrument. You have this kind of mixer section up here, object 1, object 2. So object 1, that's just that click sound. And then object 2 is more like a frame drum kind of sound. And so you have these virtual objects, and then you have the exciter, which is like the mallet or the stick or whatever you're using. And it's kind of modeling the physical interaction between the virtual object and the virtual exciter. That feels like it's getting close. Oh yeah, that works well. Just kind of fiddling around here to see if I can find something nice. I like the simplicity of that. Kind of half percussion, half metal melodic thing. I'd probably just use the arpeggiator, to be honest, and use this pattern thing here to create a little sequence and adjust the velocities to create some different kind of rhythmic patterns like that. I love playing with this this damping section. It's kind of like a filter, but it sounds way more organic. So I think I'm going to play with that. Okay, so I had a quick break, had a cup of tea, and I had a few ideas while I was mooching about. First of all, I want to put in a lead part, which is probably going to be something like a cello, and I have an idea about how I might want to program that in a way that's slightly different to my usual fare. I'd also like to add some pulsing bass elements, and then I'd also like to play around a bit more with that pattern that we put in initially, the kind of the complex bubbly pattern. And then finally, I have one other trick up my sleeve that I'd like to try out. Again, a slightly new tool for me, and another way of programming MIDI that's a bit unusual. And I'd like to make use of that in the intro to create some kind of nature-inspired droplety effects. I'm going to go for the swam cello. And the reason for this in this case is not because it necessarily has the best tone, but because it's the most flexible in a specific way. What I'm actually going to do is set the pitch bend to 12. And what I want to try is, rather than using my keyboard to input the notes, is to actually use a piece of software called Doubler. As you can see, as I'm talking, it's trying to read the pitch of my voice, and it's actually playing that on a virtual MIDI keyboard, and that signal is then going through to Logic. It's going to allow me to play glides between notes just by singing. And so a lot of the note information, rather than being on the MIDI notes themselves, are going to be written in as pitch bend curves. So if I just go ooh, then that will just be one long note with pitch bend data. This kind of gives you a very natural way of inputting notes and phrases which include these kind of natural variations in pitch, and gives you complete control over the glide between notes in a very intuitive way. In theory, let's see how it goes. So I'm going to just turn on my MIDI import, and it's already picking up data, as you can hear. There's a little bit of latency, so let's just let's just try and see what happens. Da, 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 da. Okay, now that was obviously very shoddy, but I feel like it captured the intention. And so now it's going to be a slightly laborious process of tidying this up and making sense of it. There's a lot of detailed information here. There is expression input that's based on the volume that I was singing, but obviously it's pretty grotesque. Okay, so I'm going to just manually kind of refine this, but keep these transitions the same. And I'm going to add vibrato later, so it'll sound more lively. Might add a little glissando off there, just because I can. I think on a phrase like this, this probably requires putting this in as individual notes, ba, 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 with rearticulations. So I'll probably do that in a sec. So I'll leave that for now. The tools that you choose just lead to slightly different results. And in this case, you end up with a bit more sophisticated control over the pitch bend information. So I've got vibrato speed on my mod wheel and the bite on my breath controller set to vibrato, and then I'm going to use the breath to control the overall dynamics on CC11. I'm going to use a patch called basement bass. I'm going to add a massive release to it. I think it's this one. Then I'm going to add a more pulsy one at certain moments. Quite like that patch. It's got some interesting upper harmonics to it. Let's make it much tighter. Just click in something fairly random. Just try this kind of droplet-y idea that I had. I'm going to use something called Droplets, which is a beautiful $20 plugin. Wonderfully simple. You have these little taps and you can create bars which have notes assigned to them, and then you can generate notes using these taps. which creates rhythmic patterns which have a different sort of feel to if you just use like a random note generator. You end up with some quite nice, intricate rhythmic things that you can shape quite easily using these bars. You can also lock the notes to a scale. So I'm going to choose the notes that I had in my original idea, which was a G melodic minor scale. You can also apply probability to these. If I hit Shift and drag my mouse, this little dice thing appears. The only thing I don't like about this plugin is the controls are slightly unintuitive, and it also sometimes crashes. But for $20, cool. And then that's printed it as MIDI data. Let's change that note. Let's add a note in there somewhere. In combination with a pad or something, that could be quite effective. Let's just take a chunk and feed that into pull stretch. Let's have a final listen through to where I got to. Cool. A few things that I would probably flesh out. Some of those builds could be even more powerful, I think. So I'd probably just add some additional elements to kind of support the structure that's there. But overall, I'm quite proud of where I got to. I quite enjoyed this feeling of having one foot in chaos, kind of creating these devices and having somewhat control over them, and then allowing that to inform my decisions going forward. Definitely some interesting choices and some interesting shapes that I wouldn't have necessarily come up with if I was just composing at the piano. Yeah, in this case, I was using those tools to kind of spark ideas and being a bit more exploratory. But I think also it's great when you have a very specific idea in mind, figuring out the right tool for the job, figuring out the right kind of process that's going to get you there, especially if it's something that might not be easy to just simply execute in real time. Let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks very much for watching. Happy composing, and I'll see you on the next video.